So now we're gonna be, I'm assuming, moving on to the Muslims taking Egypt now, right? After defeating the Sassanids last video.
Despite winning all of Syria and Iraq for Islam in a series of stunning victories, the Caliphate's military situation remained unstable. Fierce Persian resistance continued in the mountains to the northeast, while Emperor Heraclius was hindering the Muslim advance as much as he could. To stall for time, while he created an impenetrable dead zone between the Anatolian plain and enemy-occupied Syria, Heraclius sent envoys to his Christian Arab allies in the Jazira area, requesting that they attack the Muslim army in Syria. They obeyed the emperor's orders, crossing the Euphrates and arriving outside Emesa in March 638, where Abu Ubaidah had concentrated his forces to meet them. However, Umar, in his typically hands-on fashion, reacted to this news by sending orders to Sa'd in Persia for 3 columns to invade Jazira from Iraq. When this group of Muslim warriors launched their attack and began plundering, the Christian Arabs retreated. In the aftermath, forces under Sa'd turned and annexed Jazira completely.
Yeah, at first, I'll say, at first when Umar took control and removed Khalid, I was a little iffy about him, but I think he's proven that, like, things have been still going incredibly well for the Muslims. So, again, he's really not a bad leader. I do kind of see that he's been making a lot of good calls, and overall, yeah, he strikes me as competent, and I'm finding him interesting and seeing his leadership, you know. And, yeah, like, the Romans are basically just holding Anatolia now. That's all they've got, you know, like, Syria's gone, and Egypt's about to be gone too, I think, you know.
At the same time, multiple mounted raiding parties were sent by Abu Ubaidah into Roman lands. Khalid, the commander of one of these contingents, captured Marash in autumn 638 and hauled vast quantities of loot back to his base at Kinasrin. However, Khalid wasn't a man accustomed to hoarding wealth, routinely distributing his personal share of battle spoils to others. On one occasion, after his raid on Heraclius's lands, an Arab chief and excellent poet, Ashaz bin Qais, recited a beautiful piece for Khalid, and in return was given 10,000 dirhams. Unknown to the poet's benefactor, this act of generosity was in fact to herald the end of his peerless military career.
What do you mean by that?
Caliph Umar had been concerned about Khalid for years by 638,
Okay, wait, Caliph Umar was concerned with Khalid's reputation, fearing that the Muslims might worship him rather than one and only God. Boy, I was about to just say, man, we get it. Khalid's the best. He's generous and he's kind and he's honorable and he's a genius and he's just basically like, you know, when people say like a Mary Sue for like a female character who's just great at everything, it's like I think like the male version of that is like a Gary Stew. So it's like we get it. Khalid's like a Gary Stew, and I mean that as a compliment. I'm not like dissing him because I love Khalid. You kidding me? Like him being demoted at the first part was like a sore point for me last season 1. I personally would have never done it. I would have kept him in charge, but things have still worked out. But still, I was kind of sort of okay, at least in the sense that he was remaining. You know, but now it seems like I'm guessing he's about to be just removed completely. Which again, I like Khalid. He's been my favorite person in all of this. You know, I think he's a genius. I think a man like him should never have been removed from command. And I think he should just not be removed at all. But we've seen this a lot of times where a general might get too popular, too influential, and people might become too loyal to them. And I get Umar's concern, in a sense, with that, for sure. We've seen that a lot in history, but like, Khalid as a man strikes me as too loyal and like too. He has too much integrity to just turn against the cause, I think. But again, I think it's more fear of how people around Khalid, maybe not Khalid himself, but just everyone around, like the people following him, I can see, or giving too much credit to him. Again, like I don't hate Umar. I understand definitely where he's coming from, but I still don't agree with it. If that makes sense, like I don't think Khalid should be removed. I think a man that talented and that good should just be kept forever until he can't anymore physically or whatever. You know, but that's just how I feel.
Specifically that his personal brilliance and constant victories were enticing the Muslims to worship him rather than God. So when Umar received reports of his general's extravagance, Umar used it as an excuse to dismiss the Sword of Islam from his post and bring him to Medina. When the two formidable men came face to face, the Caliph spoke the words, "You have done, and no man has done as you have done, but it is not people who do, it is Allah who does." After this, Khalid left Arabia for Chalcis, where he lived just 4 more unhappy, unremarkable years before finally passing away in 642.
Yeah, that's a bit sad, you know. It seems like Umar at least acknowledged, at least as I interpreted that exchange, seemed to acknowledge that Khalid did a lot, but again, I guess it's good in a sense that he got to live a more peaceful end, which not many of these commanders do. It's very close, kind of a happy ending, I guess, but again, he lived out his last years pretty, I guess, unremarkably. He mentioned the word sad, so I'm wondering if he actually felt like that. Yeah, like I said, it's the word sad that caught me he used. Like, I don't know if Khalid felt sad because he wasn't being useful to the cause anymore, or like, he felt like, you know, he had more to give. You know, like, pretty tragic in that sense. He does remind me a lot of Belisarius, someone who, you know, did accomplish great things, and, you know, gave his life to, you know, his cause, but at the end kind of went out, like, not so gloriously. Though I think Khalid was definitely treated a bit better than Belisarius. I'm still pissed off at the Belisarius series and just how Justinian treated him. But, I guess Khalid, you know, had at least the luxury of going out at least at the top of his game and not in a violent way, which, but still, I don't think he was as happy, maybe just because he had more to give, but, couldn't. I don't know if he was sad at that, but, you know, again, like, I get Umar's concerns, but, you know, either way, GG Khalid, right? Definitely was a great man.
As the undefeated victor of hundreds of clashes leaves our story, another bold but historically unappreciated Arab general enters the limelight. That was the 48-year-old Amr ibn Alas, who won distinction during the battles at Ajnadain, Yarmouk, and many others. When Abu Ubaidah appointed the conquered regions to his subordinates, Amr received all of Palestine.
Is Ammar gonna be the next character we're following? Is he gonna be the new main character because Khalid's gone? He's the new one taking the stage.
Upon moving into the area, he forced the surrender of Gaza and several other Roman garrisons which had remained unconquered after the fall of Jerusalem. In early 639, plague spread rapidly throughout the Levant. The Arabs, unaccustomed to this kind of terrible disease because of their nomadic lifestyle, died in the thousands, including generals Yazid, Shurabil, and Abu Ubaidah himself.
Holy crap. there goes a lot of military talent right there. Abu kind of went out unceremoniously too. He was like basically the replacement of Khalid. So yeah, I guess Ammar kind of is gonna set up to be the next guy, right?
It is worth noting that upon Yazid's death, his younger brother Muawiyah was...
After the death of his fellow companions, Caliph Umar went to Jabiyah to organize the administration in the region.
appointed as governor in his place. Ammar, who survived, was given command of the army, and this gave him a golden opportunity to propose an idea to the Caliph. Having visited Alexandria multiple times earlier in his life, Ammar was well aware of just how prosperous the Nile region was, and believed it would be easy to conquer. The new commander put forward his plan to seize Roman Egypt for Islam, confidently declaring to the Caliph, "It is the richest of lands and the weakest in defending itself." Although Umar, who wished to...
Egypt is so rich, like, we've seen it through so many years. There's so many series, from Alexander's conquest to Ptolemy's taking it, the Romans conquering it, like, it's always without fail mentioned that Egypt is prosperous and it's a rich land, and, you know, basically known as a breadbasket. It really is such... It's like a region like near the Nile that's just rich and everyone wants it, and you can see why. Like it never stopped being like this place of prosperity through so much of history, you know?
To consolidate Muslim gains after years of incessant warfare and plague, was initially reluctant, believing Ammar was underestimating the task. His eloquence and persistence eventually led the Caliph to relent. Restricted to just 4,000 troops, mainly cavalry, Ammar set forth from Jabiyah that same night in total secrecy, under the condition that he would withdraw if instructions to turn back reached him before he crossed into Egypt. However, if Ammar's army was already inside Egypt when these instructions arrived, it could keep going. Convinced almost immediately that this expedition was too risky, Umar sent a camel rider off to Ammar carrying a sealed letter ordering him to pull back. When it reached the general at Rafah, just a few miles from Egypt, Ammar understood that the letter would doom his expedition before it even began. So Ammar left the message unopened and moved into Egypt, and only then opened the letter. And since the army was...
Wait, let me get that one more time, I'm sorry.
...expedition before it even began. So Ammar left the message unopened and moved into Egypt, and only then opened the letter. And
oh, that's a little fun ploy he did right there. He knows that his expedition, he really wants to do this, so he's like, kind of in a way, kind of finding a loophole or trying to find ways around it. Okay, so I see what Umar is starting to become a bit more... I'm not sure cautious is the right word I want to use, but he seems more reserved in terms of the conquest and expansion, and seems to just really want to consolidate what he has, and while his generals want to keep going and going, you know? Which I think Umar's temperance ain't such a bad thing. Like, consolidate what you have, you know, definitely. Unless you go full Alexander, you just take everything, and then, like, if something happens, everything falls apart, you know? So, I think Umar's temperance is a good trait. He's starting to show, but, Umar seems like he's going for it. He's like, well, I need to take Egypt, so, you know, I need to take the land of incest, so I can't be stopped, not even by the caliphate, you know?
And since the army was already in Egypt when Umar's orders were revealed, Ammar reasoned that it could keep going.
I love the loopholes, the mental gymnastics he's going with. He's like, wait a minute, technically I'm already in Egypt, so I guess this doesn't count. I'm gonna choose to ignore this. I'm already I'm looking forward to see what Ammar does. He seems like he's about to cause a lot of trouble right now. You know, Khalid would have listened and just been like, okay, but not Ammar. Ammar seems like he has a bit more rebelliousness to him, so I think that's gonna create more drama down the line, which I like. Who doesn't love drama, you know?
The timeless province of power and riches was incredibly vulnerable, weakened by years of military laxity, and alienated from the imperial authorities in Constantinople by long-standing cultural and religious differences. The primary factor was that the Copts, Egypt's native population, adhered to a different form of Christianity to the empire at large. Emperor Heraclius in particular persecuted any perceived heretic in a manner that made religious division inevitable. Heretic in a manner that made Heraclius in particular persecute.
And also Egypt seems to be an area that kind of operates sort of on its own. Like, I think of like the Napoleonic era, where technically they were under the Ottoman Empire, but they were still somewhat independent, at least with their Mamluks. So Egypt also seems to have a weird like knack for becoming more independent and isolated from whatever empire has absorbed it. So I don't know, like I said, Egypt is like one of the oldest civilizations in the world, and it might have been like the first world superpower, you know, or at least one of the first. So like, it really is such a rich, historically rich area that's even more ancient, because like I said, it's one of the first civilizations and oldest in the world. I think it and China are like in the top 5, so there's just so much going on there, right? One of these days we gotta cover like an Egypt series. I hope like Kings and Generals or someone does an Egypt series, because I think it would be so cool to learn. I'm kind of interested in delving more into Egypt, you know?
The Roman authorities in Alexandria were alerted to Ammar's presence, responding by raising troops and sending some of them to reinforce Pelusium, the key to Egypt. Setting forth from Arish in late December 639, the Caliphate's small army of veterans soon reached Pelusium, besieging it by land. However, Roman naval superiority meant that the city garrison could be reinforced and supplied, and this led to a 2-month-long siege, which was only brought to a conclusion when the Muslims repulsed a sortie and stormed the city in mid-February 640. After taking Pelusium, to the alarm and astonishment of the government in Alexandria, Ammar marched unopposed along the Nile Delta's eastern fringe until he reached the citadel of Bilbais. The defenders resisted under blockade for a month, giving the Romans time to shift their forces around. Aware that the marauding 4,000 Arabs were aiming for the Memphis area, Egypt's prefect and patriarch of Alexandria, Cyrus, marched a 20,000-strong army to reinforce the nearby fortress called Babylon. Commanded by Augustulus Theodorus and garrisoned by 5,000 soldiers, Babylon was one of the Nile's strongest defensive bastions, standing 60 feet high in places and possessing walls up to 6 feet thick. By the time Ammar starved the Bilbais defenders into surrender in the spring of 640, the Romans were prepared for his inevitable assault. Bypassing Heliopolis,
Ammar only has like 4,000 guys, right? Like that's what he mentioned Umar gave him. So if he manages to pull so much of this off with just 4,000 people, mainly cavalry, I'm gonna be amazed. Because he's already kind of handicapped in a sense that he doesn't have like a really huge or big army, especially lacking a lot of infantry and like, you know, ranged fighters, it seems.
on their left, the Muslims arrived outside Babylon in May. Due to its sheer size, only some of Theodorus's army were manning the battlements, while most were encamped outside of the northern wall of the fortress, protected by a deep arcing ditch. Fortifying this secondary position even further were spikes in front, and undug sections around the perimeter to act as sally points. Shortly after arriving and witnessing the Roman strength arrayed inside Babylon, Amr launched his 4,000 against the Roman units directly in front of the trench. After a hard-fought skirmish, the Muslims were repulsed with relative ease and set about finally making camp. Observing that his plan to keep Theodorus on the defensive was paying off, Amr mounted daily raids against the Roman positions all along the ditch. Furthermore, in an attempt to conceal just how tiny his forces were, the Muslim commander split and spread it over a large area. This state of affairs lasted for 2 months, the Muslims constantly assailing the Roman positions, and the Romans remaining hunkered down behind the ditch, presumably believing they would be able to win without fighting. By July,
okay, so the Romans are going all defensive, and that's kind of smart because anytime, like we covered with the Sassanids last time, they had a great defensive position and it all fell apart the moment they left. So it seems like the Romans are doing the opposite of that. They're not leaving, which is gonna make already like Umar seems to be fighting an uphill battle. Like now he's gonna lead the enemies out, but even then, if they're not coming out, how is he gonna take it? Like, again, he's really handicapped, I feel like, with this small force he has, so I don't know how he's gonna do it.
No opportunity to gain a decisive victory had shown itself to Amr, and his men were slowly tiring. So, having put the eventuality to the back of his mind, the man who had proclaimed that taking Egypt would be simple wrote to the Caliph asking for reinforcements. Rather than chiding his overly optimistic general, Umar mustered and sent him 4,000 reinforcements to conclude the campaign.
That's amazing. Like, you think with how he just straight up ignored Umar's previous order, that Umar would be angry, but I guess Umar's like, well, since you're committed, I rather as well help you win. Like, you know, I'm imagining kind of like that mentality. Like, well, rather as well, right? So that's interesting.
Who reached Amr a few weeks later. With these new forces, the Muslim attacks on Babylon were renewed with even greater.
So he's got like 8,000, right? Like the previous 4,000 and now another 4. So he's got like 8,000 men with him. Seems to be an all cavalry force though.
Force, killing large numbers of Roman soldiers, but failing to break the bastion's resistance. Even more hesitantly than the first time, Amr sent another request for Umar's aid. This time a further 4,000 troops were dispatched under the leadership of Zubayr bin al-Awwam, who, despite being offered Amr's command by the irritated Caliph, merely stated that he wished to help the Muslims engaged in Egypt.
Okay, he doesn't want to seem to take command, but Umar seems like, I love Ammar. He's got audacity to him, you know? He's like, I'm gonna break your orders, I'm gonna turn away from them, and I'm gonna keep asking you to help, and you're gonna do. I really like him. I feel like he's gonna be an entertaining person to watch his exploits. But I feel like it's gonna reach a point where him and Umar are straight up about to like get into a conflict. I feel like that's inevitable, right?
These new troops arrived in late September. After conducting a personal reconnaissance mission around the area, Zubayr pointed out something to Amr which the general seems to have missed. Still present about 10 miles behind the Muslim army was the Roman garrisoned city of Heliopolis. If coordinated correctly, these troops could smash into the Muslims from behind if Theodorus launched any attack from Babylon. To remove this potential threat, Amr led a large portion of his 12,000 soldiers to Heliopolis.
Man, I'm surprised. That's good reconnaissance. I'm surprised Ammar didn't notice it, but thank goodness they did, because that could have been a real bad point, you know?
Leaving just enough at the fortress to keep the Romans on their toes. Upon approaching the walls, however, some of the garrison's cavalry contingent emerged from the city and beat some of Amr's horsemen in a brief engagement. Nevertheless, they were forced to pull back inside the walls as the city was besieged. Only a short time after investing Heliopolis, Zubayr and a small unit of hand-picked warriors scaled the walls in a dashing maneuver and
Amr seems like now stuck between a rock and a hard place. He's losing men both sides. And he's basically having to capture 2 areas now.
breached the city. Seeing this, and realizing that the result of the clash was inevitable anyway, Heliopolis' garrison sued for peace and paid the jizya.
Oh wow. Okay, I was gonna be like, how's he gonna get out of this? Seems like things are not going well, but like, okay, he captured that, thank goodness. So, yeah.
After which Amr and Zubayr returned to Babylon. In their absence, the Romans had driven away the Muslim detachments closest to the trench and re-established their positions beyond it. Theodorus, likely realizing that he wasn't going to have the luxury of simply waiting the invaders out, began employing the Muslims' own tactics against them, launching daily raids through the Roman bridgeheads. Although the Romans generally lost more men in these scattered engagements, they could afford to, while Amr could not. The stalemate went on relatively unchanged until a revered Arab officer, Kharija bin Huzafa, approached Amr with a risky but potentially decisive plan to win the battle.
I'm sandwiched between the 2 generations.
That night, Kharija was given a cavalry regiment and ordered to lay his trap, which he did by riding around to the southern spur of a featureless ridge on the eastern side of the field. After quietly taking up a concealed position relatively close to the Romans' ditch, the Muslim cavalry waited. As Huzafa suspected, when morning came, the Roman forces crossed the trench in force and deployed for battle. The Muslims arrayed opposite them.
Oh my goodness, they're about to like attack from the side. We've seen this so many times, especially when Khalid used it, huh? So like I'm assuming they're about to like fall from them. That's a flank, right? The oldest trick in the book, which the Muslims are the masters of.
Both sides were ready. Theodorus launched his attack across the front, pushing Amr, who ordered his army to retreat from Babylon with suspicious ease. It was
Yeah, they're about to use the flank, dude. Holy crap, I'm telling you, man, the Muslims are the masters of this move. Like, we've seen this so many times, especially in, like, Season 1. Wow.
in reality a feigned retreat. When the melee had moved far beyond Babylon's defensive trench, Kharija's mounted contingent galloped out from their hiding place behind the ridge and occupied the crossing areas which Theodorus would have to use for any retreat. Amr, seeing that his horsemen were in place, countercharged with immense ferocity, driving the Romans back towards their own fortifications. Hearing the given signal, Kharija also launched his assault, crashing straight into Theodorus's rear, hemming the Romans in and then encircling them. Many defenders were killed, but a few Roman units turned and burst through Huzafa's cavalry, managing to re-secure the crossing points. The remnants of the Roman army at Babylon retreated across the trench, pursued closely by Amr's forces, who continued their attack up to the very walls of the fortress. Fighting continued in the space between the ditch and the citadel proper, until the gate was closed from inside. Those who got in were the lucky ones, as not a single Roman soldier remained alive on the field of battle. The morale of Cyrus, who was not a military man by profession,
Cyrus was the bishop and patriarch of Alexandria before he became a prefect.
and the Roman soldiery as a whole, was completely shaken by this stark defeat, and to the prefect, it was clear that peace had to be concluded. To make matters even more dire, Amr somehow got his hands on a few catapults and used them to launch deadly boulders, softening up the defences. When this began happening, Cyrus departed Babylon with a small escort and took up residence on the mid-river island of Rauda, from which the fortress was being resupplied. Then the Coptic prefect dejectedly sent word to the Muslims that he wished to treat with them. Envoys were exchanged back and forth between the two sides, and Heraclius' viceroy attempted to offer Ammar a lavish bribe if the Muslims left Egypt, but the Arab commander responded by giving 3 options: conversion to Islam, payment of the jizya, or death. Cyrus favored capitulating in some form, but his Egyptian colleagues wouldn't have any of it, so the stalemate continued outside the impenetrable fortress. Since coming to terms with Cyrus was impossible, Ammar went into Babylon with a few companions in order to speak with Theodorus. However, when he was entering the fortress, a Roman soldier muttered to him scornfully, "You have entered, now see how you get out." Correctly believing orders had been given for him to be killed upon exiting the conference, Ammar tricked his way out of the fortress, convincing Theodorus that he was going to bring even more of his generals unwittingly into the trap. These attempts at ending the siege.
Look, dude, Ammar got out of that. Like, the guy's cunning, I have to he seems to demonstrate some cunning and trickery. Managed to get out of that situation where it seems like they were about to murder him. I thought they were about to straight up try to kill him. So, yeah.
Failed, and the gridlock outside Babylon continued. But finally, in mid-December, the observant Zubayr noticed that since most of the fighting had taken place on Babylon's north side, the riverside Gate of Iron and its 2 guard towers were relatively undefended. Just like that, the Muslims had found a key to Theodorus' citadel. Swiftly putting his infiltration plan into action with Ammar's blessing, Zubayr assembled a unit to conduct the operation. On the moonless, clear night of December 20th, 640, most of the Muslim army arrayed quietly outside the Gate of Iron, while Zubayr and his comrades climbed ladders up the wall. Then, when some of his men were gathered on top, a deafening Islamic battle cry was sounded, echoed by the entire army, causing shock and panic amongst defenders who had no idea what was happening. Amidst the chaos, Zubayr slew the gatehouse sentries and broke the chain which held the gate closed, allowing Ammar and the Muslim army to flood inside. While some of the more elite Roman formations made a brave last stand, most of their comrades routed towards the Nile. Once they reached the riverbank, the soldiers crossed to the safety of Rauda on pre-prepared boats, which ferried soldiers back and forth throughout the night. Among those who fled was Theodorus, who managed to escape Ammar's grasp and run back to Alexandria.
Holy crap. Again, Zubayr is his name, seems to be really observant and seems to have really helped out Ammar, who at certain times seemed like he was kind of like could have been caught unawares. So Ammar seems to have a lot of luck on his side so far.
The next day, Cyrus sued for and obtained peace for the Copts on Muslim terms, agreeing to pay the jizya and submit the entire country to Islamic rule. The Romans in Egypt could either accept and remain, or reject and depart. Unsurprisingly, when Heraclius received a letter from Cyrus seeking the imperial stamp of approval for his peace with Ammar, the emperor was furious and categorically refused, responding with a message full of scorn and insults. To ensure that an active defense of Egypt continued despite the prefect's treachery, Heraclius had other messages ordering firm resistance delivered to all of his Roman generals in Egypt, who obeyed their sovereign without question. Cyrus, disavowed by the Romans, put himself and the Copts under Ammar's command, promising the Muslims administrative and engineering assistance. Memphis was now secure, and the push towards Alexandria could begin.
I guess we'll cover Alexandria tomorrow. Bye, everyone.